Tuesday afternoon. I call this meeting to order, the 21st meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. We are continuing today our study of the Access to Credit study, focusing specifically our second of 3 meetings on pensions. We have with us here today organizations. We have the Public Sector Pension Investment Board. We have the Pension Investment Association of Canada. We have Teamsters Canada. We have the United Senior Citizens of Ontario. And we have, as an individual, as an independent analyst, we have Ms. Diana Urquhart. Ladies and point of order? Sorry. Monsieur Laforêt, on a point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. If it's possible, could you set aside 5 minutes at the end of our meeting to discuss future business of this committee and to organize our future meetings? Is that all right? Thank you.
Okay, we'll have, if we could have each organization and individual, if we could have you present your opening statement of 5 minutes each, we'll go down the line, and then we'll start with questions from members. So we'll start with the Public Sector Pension Investment Board.
Good morning. Mr. Chair, members of Parliament, I want to thank you for inviting us here today to discuss the current liquidity crisis and its impact on our financial system, and in particular its impact on pension funds. My name is John Valentini. I am Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Public Sector Pension Investment Board, otherwise known as PSP Investments. With me here today is Pierre Malo, First Vice President, Asset Allocation Strategies and Research. Investissement PSP est une société de la couronne créée en 1999 par le gouvernement du Canada.
PSP Investments is a Crown corporation created in 1999 by the Government of Canada to invest net contributions received after April 1, 2000 from the pension plans of the Public Service, the Canadian Forces, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. We also manage employer and employee contributions to the Reserve Force pension plan made after March 1, 2007. We are one of the youngest and fastest growing investment managers in Canada. It is important to note that we are an investment manager and not a pension plan manager. Responsibility for the liabilities rests with the federal government. The pension payments under the defined benefit plans are guaranteed by the Government of Canada. We report to the Treasury Board and to each of our stakeholders through their respective ministers, the Minister of Public Safety and the Minister of National Defence. The Office of the Chief Actuary of Canada produces a triennial report on each of the plans, the last one covering the period ending March 31st, 2008. The next one should be available this year. Our financial statements are also audited by the Auditor General of Canada. Historically, we have performed favorably amongst our peers in Canada. According to RBC Dexia, in the past 4 fiscal years ending March 2008, we have ranked in the top quarter of peer pension funds in Canada based on investment performance. However, in absolute terms, our short-term performance these past 2 years has clearly been impacted by the liquidity crisis that began in 2007. The ABC paper crisis was clearly one of the first consequences of the global liquidity crisis. I know that this committee has studied ABCP, so I will not prolong my discussion of it, other than to say that we are extremely fortunate that the Pan-Canadian Investors Committee for the restructuring of non-bank ABCP was able to successfully restructure the non-bank ABCP market in Canada.
Restructuring process. A successful resolution of the crisis is a major achievement that will help most investors, small and large, to ultimately recover the majority of their investments. Until the fall of 2008, the global liquidity crisis remained somewhat contained. Then in September 2008, the other shoe dropped and the financial world changed dramatically after the collapse of several large financial institutions. Confidence was broken and financial markets around the world plunged. It was the worst sell-off since the Great Depression. Liquidity disappeared and volatility increased dramatically. Buyers became sellers. Many investors were forced to sell their investments across all asset classes at depressed prices. While managing liquidity was challenging last autumn, PSP managed to work through that time quite effectively. It is important to note that this was not the first time in the past decade that we experienced such a large market movement that affected pension fund returns. In 2001, equity markets dropped approximately 18%. In our own fiscal year 2004, equity markets and PSP investment performance rose more than 25%. There is no doubt that the current financial crisis exacerbated a serious problem that was already present in the pension industry, namely the funding position of many pension plans. When looking for solutions to this problem, one has to look at the basic equation of a pension plan. Net contributions plus investment returns, the assets, should equate the present value of the future benefits to be paid, the liabilities. If contribution levels or investment returns are too low, or if the liability structure changes, then we see a deficit developing. I will concentrate on how investment managers try to mitigate the market volatility. In the case of PSP investments, the investment policy is developed taking into account the liability structure of the pension plans, the desired contribution level of the stakeholders, and the perceived risk appetite of the sponsor and stakeholders. We are presently working with the Treasury Board Secretariat and the Office of the Chief Actuary in developing a financing policy that would clarify these key elements. How do we invest the net contributions? In an ideal world, the net contributions that we receive could be invested in Canadian government inflation-linked bonds, and the risk associated would be zero. Unfortunately, this is not a feasible solution. Therefore, we need to invest in different market instruments with a higher risk-adjusted return. This is done through diversification. Since 2004, PSP Investments has diversified into more asset classes, including private investments, real estate, and infrastructure. Diversification has added significant value to PSP's investment performance over that period. In fact, a review of long-term results that we had performed ourselves last year on the major funds in Canada indicated that private investment returns in real estate, private equity, and infrastructure all outperformed the total overall fund of each of those funds, thus outperforming public markets. PSP Investments is in a unique position. We have the liquidity and the flexibility to take a long-term view of our investments. Each year, we receive a steady inflow of new funds of almost $4 billion, and net contributions are projected to remain positive until the year 2030. Because of this, we are less affected by the crisis than many other investors. We are seeing the stress price levels for many assets, including solid infrastructure and real estate assets with good cash flows and built-in price increases. As patient buyers, we are well positioned to benefit from the drop in asset prices, which means that our stakeholders will ultimately benefit from today's distressed prices. That is good for our stakeholders, and that is ultimately good for the Canadian taxpayer. Of course, for us to succeed, we need markets and the global economy to succeed as well. I would like to thank you for your attention and giving us the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go to the Pension Investment Association of Canada, please.
I'd like to thank the committee for inviting the Pension Investment Association of Canada, or PIAC, to appear today. I'm Barbara Miazga. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the Board of Directors of PIAC. PIAC has been a collective voice for Canadian pension funds for over 30 years now. PIAC is actively involved in advocacy on behalf of its members, and an example of that would be the submission that was made in response to the Financial Sector Division of the Department of Finance in response to the consultation paper on private pensions, and that was dated on March 13, 2008. My remarks today will be centered on the highlights of that submission. Moving into the background, this committee's study is on measures to enhance credit availability and the stability of the Canadian financial system. The relevance to PIAC is more towards the stability of the Canadian financial system. And PIAC's position is that the stability of defined benefit pension plans in Canada is integral to the overall stability of the Canadian financial system. There's really two areas where our members impact the financial system. One is in that the financial markets are largely dominated by large institutional players. Our member funds have responsibility for oversight and management of over $940 billion in assets. So that has a significant impact on any activities in the pension industry, impacts the capital markets. The other area is that defined benefit pensions have a significant impact on the economic well-being of millions of Canadians. And that goes to, those both go to PIAC's mission to promote sound investment practices and good governance for the benefit of pension plan sponsors and pension plan beneficiaries. In the submission that PIAC made on March the 13th, PIAC proposed that the Government of Canada could take steps to alleviate some of the funding and regulatory challenges that pension plan sponsors are facing. And that's related to the shrinkage in defined benefit plan coverage in Canada. That decline is more pronounced for private sector workers, and the fundamental reasons for the decline and for the greater impact on private sector workers is the funding challenges, the risk-reward asymmetry, and a complex regulatory regime. There's 3 steps that PIAC proposes the Government of Canada could take. The first of those steps is to ease the solvency funding requirements and address the risk-reward asymmetry in the rules regarding surplus entitlement. The reason for focusing on solvency funding is that the solvency calculation is only one of 2 calculations to determine the funded position of a pension plan. Solvency is hypothetical in the scenario where there's a plan wind-up. The stronger the plan sponsor and the less likelihood of a wind-up, the less relevant is the solvency calculation. And so we're focusing on the solvency relief as being a key component in that first step. That can be done by unconditionally extending the amortization period for solvency funding from 5 years to 10 years for financially strong companies. It could also be achieved by providing plan sponsors with the flexibility to use letters of credit, which already exist on a permanent basis in both Alberta and British Columbia. It could also be achieved by permitting plan sponsors to establish special purpose accounts. We're calling them solvency accounts that are independent from the main pension trust. What that will achieve is avoiding the situation of trapped surplus, where plan sponsors make solvency payments that in the future form part of a surplus, and there has been experience in the past where those surpluses have resulted in changes to the benefit structure that are long-term and permanent. And if the solvency account is independent from the main plan trust, that alleviates the situation of that trapped surplus. The second step that the Government of Canada could take is to facilitate the opportunity for plan sponsors to enhance the funded position of their pension plans when able to do so by amending the Income Tax Act to allow plan sponsors to make contributions beyond the current 110% to at least 125%. And what that would achieve is the ability to build a more sufficient cushion during the good times to provide some downside protection in the tough times. Okay. The final step that could be taken is to hold pension investments to the standard of a prudent person and eliminate all quantitative limits on investing. And I'll just focus on 2 reasons for eliminating the quantitative limits, one being that it puts Canadian pension plans on an unlevel playing field with foreign pension plans in foreign jurisdictions not subject to those restrictions, and it's arbitrary. In conclusion, funding flexibility and regulatory relief will safeguard the long-term viability of defined benefit pension plans, thus contributing to the overall stability of the Canadian financial system. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We'll now go to Teamsters Canada, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having us here this morning. My name is Phil Benson. I'm the lobbyist with Teamsters Canada. Teamsters Canada is a labour organization with more than 125,000 members. It is affiliated with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters with more than 1.4 million members across North America. We represent workers in several sectors, including transport, air, rail, road, and ports, retail, motion pictures, breweries, soft drinks, construction, and on. In our September 2005 submission, we stated the private pension plan system in Canada, the U.S., and other G8 countries is entering a period of financial crisis caused by years of inappropriate practices by those responsible for the well-being of these plans. The financial deficit of the system is in the billions, if not the trillions of dollars. Those responsible include government and government regulators, plan sponsors, and professionals involved with the operation of the plans, including actuaries, investment managers, accountants, lawyers, and others. After 40 years of regulation and more than a decade of unprecedented economic growth, It is unforgivable that there's a pension plan crisis in Canada. Yet, if it was a crisis during boom times, what can we expect 3 months into a recession? What should we expect? We submit nothing will change unless you have the courage to fundamentally change the regulatory regime underpinning pensions, one that recognizes that pensions are foregone wages of workers, and to stop corporate greed. There should be no questions of if, only when, and how. Let's start with fundamentals. Pensions are not a gift from a company. Pensions are foregone wages, a contract between the company and the worker. The regulations do not recognize that relationship nor protect it. The only reason for a pension plan to exist is to deliver promised pensions to current and future retiring members of the plan. Fiduciary duty must mean fiduciary duty. No payment holidays, no surplus clawbacks. It really comes down to risks. For pensioners and workers, risk is zero in real terms. The money has to be there. Under the current regulatory regime, pensions are viewed by companies as just another investment to manage within its goals of maximizing shareholder returns. After all, when a company boosts income and returns to shareholders, it pleases investors and fattens CEO compensation packages. People talk about a company's risk. Well, we don't seem to think there's much. If there's surplus in the plan, take a payment holiday. If there's a solvency issue, claim financial problems and spread the solvency problems over 10 years. If a company goes bankrupt, the CEO will get a buyout, and I guess he has to downsize to a 75-foot yacht. The underfunded pension plan means employees lose their pensions. This is not fantasy. Teamsters are at risk of losing payments from the Nortel pension plan, while the company is paying a retention bonus of $45 million to its executive officers. The companies begging relief say that they need to pay less into the underfunded pensions so they can invest in the capital items for the company. Create jobs, grow the economy. A great line for 2009, but that's exactly what they said in 2005 and 2006 when this started. The fact companies admit it proves our point. To companies, the pension funds are just another capital pool to fund their ambitions. And silly us, we thought companies had a fiduciary duty to beneficiaries. Clearly not. Our members and the public don't buy that argument, and we hope you don't either. Let's talk about establishing the principle of delivery of pensions with a very high degree of certainty. Investment policy should be focused on the primary objective of meeting obligations. Eliminating the holiday for pension payments when a plan is in surplus would send the message to lower the investment risks. Accepting the fact that pension plans are foregone wages and giving all surplus to the beneficiaries would further that goal. Treat pensions in the same manner as insurance, forcing a move towards bonds and away from equities. Conventional wisdom is that stocks beat bonds is, well, conventional. I gave you an article from the National Post from Mr. Gold and Mr. Bader. Quote, venerable pension consultant Peter Bernstein reports that over the most recent 5, 10, and 25 years, U.S. Treasury bonds earned more than U.S. equities. I'll add, there's no money in selling bonds. Of course, some claim that all bond funds would be too expensive. Well, some information just came to me. A company that we deal with has 40% of its funds in the market. It admitted that's what was causing the deficit in the fund. A wholly bond fund would have cost $30 to $40 million a year over the past 15 years, a term of record profits. It faces $300 million a year over 5 or $150 million over 10. We have pension plans because of the demands of citizens coming out of the dirty 30s and World War II. Come to think about it, just about all our social programs. We have them because citizens demanded it. I will tell you, companies don't want pension plans. They don't want unemployment insurance, CPP, workers' comp, welfare. They don't want health and safety laws. They don't even want to pay wages. Come to think of it, isn't that why we're here? The two largest voter blocs by turnout and size are seniors and baby boomers. Seniors want to continue to receive their pensions, and baby boomers are finally getting serious about retiring. Politicians long ago made their decision who they stood with. Now it's your turn. At the beginning of this presentation, we asked you to have courage to dare to make changes, and I do want to be very clear that Teamsters Canada is willing to work with any and all of you to make better laws and regulations that will protect working people on the job and long retired. Thank you for having me here. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now go to the United Senior Citizens of Ontario, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Clerk. Thank you. I'm Marie Smith, President of the United Senior Citizens of Ontario, and it is a pleasure to be here today to bring our problems to you. There is great anxiety amongst our 300,000 seniors who are members of the United Senior Citizens of Ontario about the financial crisis. Companies are filing for bankruptcy protection and going bankrupt, while their pension funds have large deficits. Seniors are worried their pensions will be cut. Personal retirement savings have been hit. Seniors are afraid to spend money because they need to preserve their capital. The professional investment managers of Canada Pension Fund have let seniors down. Pension funds brought high-risk investment products, allowing financial companies to amass these toxic products on their balance sheet. The bank executives and the pension fund managers themselves were paid millions of dollars compensation based on false profits from high-risk products. Now the pensioners have to pay for their greed and possible fraud. The pension fund managers let this happen without uttering a word to us. The United Senior Citizens of Ontario, our affiliate, the National Pensioners and Senior Citizens Federation, 1,000 senior members, have been working with Diane Eckert since 2006 on financial abuse affecting seniors. Pensioners and senior citizens are suffering billions of dollars in loss in their retirement accounts due to unsuitable, fraudulent investment products. These are being sold to them on the basis of misleading marketing information. We conclude that our members' interests are not being protected by current self-regulatory organization and provincial securities commissions governing securities and accounting standards. Representatives of the United Senior Citizens of Ontario, better known as the USCO, and the National Pensioner Seniors Federation met with the federal public safety minister officials and the opposition public safety critics in Ottawa on March the 30th. We have told these public safety officials that the first priority for structural change in the field of securities is to rebuild how the securities crime policing is done in this country. The USCO supports the proposed new Canadian Securities Crime Unit developed by the respected and recently retired Detective Sergeant of the Toronto Police Service Fraud Squad, Gary Logan. We need to listen to Gary Logan because he is a success story in securities crime and policing. Mr. Logan put two of Canada's notorious road brokers in jail, Michael Holliday and Nelson Allen. I would also like to bring to your attention that seniors are having difficulty surviving on the old age security and the CPP pension plan. These seniors on low income would welcome an increase so they can have both heat and food in their homes. Seniors would also like to thank the government for income splitting. But what can you do for individuals who still have the same expenses but now find themselves living alone, but everything costs the same in their home? I'll be interested in your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Now, finally, Ms. Urquhart, for your opening statement.
Yes, good morning. I'm going to speak this morning about toxic investment products and how they've contributed to the financial crisis in Canada. And my apologies, I do have a very hoarse voice this morning. Hopefully I'll get through it. The financial crisis in Canada is wreaking havoc on millions of Canadians through pension fund underfunding, lost savings, and now lost jobs. We have the filing for bankruptcy protection in Canada of Abitibi Bowater, Smurfit Stone, Masonite, recently Nortel, and expected General Motors bankruptcy protection filings. I'd like to note that the Nortel case is a legal precedent-setting case in which a major corporation of Canada plans to lay off thousands of people and not pay severance. And in addition, the Nortel pension fund is expected to have a deficit of as much as 40%. So there is real anxiety amongst the Nortel pensioners and certainly anxiety amongst the severed workers of Nortel. In many instances, the corporate calamities that are leading to the distress in the world can be tracked back to securities crime. There's been no policing intervention and deterrence in our country. Effective securities crime policing is a necessary ingredient for the stability of Canada's financial system. The world's, including Canada's, financial system has been rocked with systemic fraud in subprime mortgages, structured income products sold by the securities industry. I've given testimony to your committee on 2 occasions, once on the income trust product, which we said was subject to systemic fraud in deceptive yields, and more recently on the non-bank asset-backed commercial paper product, in which there are at the moment 85 cents of mark-to-market losses on the dollar, $27 billion of current losses in the asset-backed commercial paper product line of Canada. And as I warned on the income trust product in 2005 and 2006, we have over $30 billion of damages in the business income trust market product alone, with about the same amount likely in the energy income trusts. The expert panel, excuse me. Yes.
Can I just suggest
Back.
putting a little distance between yourself?
Okay,
There is a bit
especially
of
with
feedback.
the hoarse throat. The expert panel on securities regulation responds to the public outcry about Canada's failure to deter securities fraud on January 12th by proposing a new National Securities Commission and having a consumer advisory panel report to that commission. The Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada has responded to the public outcry with a new foundation for the advancement of investor rights. The OSC's answer a few weeks ago to the outcry is to introduce a new investor secretariat. We say that all of these proposed remedies by the investment industry and by the provincial securities regulators are sadly inadequate. These are not the appropriate remedial actions to be taken given the lessons that we must learn from the financial crisis throughout the world now bearing down on our country as well. I want to spend a few moments to talk about securities crime policing in Canada. We do not agree with the RCMP Integrated Market Enforcement Team having exclusive or effective exclusive jurisdiction for securities crime policing in our country. We strongly disagree with the current actions of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to integrate its exclusive securities crime unit with the securities regulatory system of Canada. We believe it is totally unacceptable that all current RCMP IMET securities criminal complaints and plans for investigation are obliged by this federal government to be shared with the Joint Consultation Group. We have a letter from Dean Buzza, the head of the RCMP, that indicates that every securities crime complaint and plan for an RCMP investigation must first meet with the approval and recommendation of the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada and of the Mutual Fund Dealers Association of Canada. And we believe that this is wrong and is highly vulnerable to corruptive influences on whether or not securities crime investigations are taking place in this country. We agree that Canada should adopt a new federal provincial securities crime unit that was proposed and designed by Gary Logan, 32 years service in the securities crime policing field. We do not believe that the Securities Commission, the current provincial commissions, nor the proposed National Securities Commission should be involved in securities fraud policing. This is the work of police, and we believe the new securities crime unit, which is described in a video that's been put together by Gary and myself, is the way for our country to go in order to receive justice for the victims of securities crime.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Urquhart. We'll start with questions with John McCallum for 7 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. I guess I'd like to begin with Mr. Benson, who had us, and I'm wondering if there might be any common ground here. As you know, I believe it's 7 major federally regulated companies are seeking to spread their payments over 10 years rather than 5 years to restore their pension assets. And I don't think that the unions or the pensioners are necessarily happy with that under status quo rulings. under status quo rules. But you seem to imply, and this is what I'm trying to get at, that such a 10-year period might be acceptable to you under certain conditions, like if there were greater restrictions on the nature of the investments that pension funds could do. Can you briefly tell us whether there would be some regulatory changes or quid pro quo under which you would find a 10-year period acceptable?
Sorry, thank you, Mr. McCallum. Just so you know, one of those companies that came to you just announced a $242 million profit for the first quarter. So during the last round when we talked about it, during boom times, we suggested that perhaps when they made a profit, part of the profit should go directly to pension holders, not all of it, but of course some of it. The comment came back was, my concern was there would be a recession, and I was told, well, you're old-fashioned, Phil, we solved that problem, there won't be one. I don't like to blue sky and too much in front of committees. However, obviously some of the plans are in problems because of the regulatory schemes and decisions that were made over the years. We can't get out of that overnight. And we certainly, as the Teamsters, do not want companies to go out of business. We're in the business of helping businesses make money because that's how our membership makes money. If the core principles are there, meaning that the investment strategy is moving towards more of a bond world, some of the things we suggest are in the package. As I said in my presentation, I think if I got to it, I should in the beginning, it's not if we should do it, it's when and how, and I think you're asking me the when and how question.
Now, what I'm asking you is, are there specific changes, for example, that pension funds would not be allowed to hold more than a certain percentage of their assets in the stock market, or things of that nature that are concrete, that you would regard as a quid pro quo, a satisfactory quid pro quo for a 10-year payout? Because if you don't have a 10-year payout, you could have major problems for some of these companies, which would not necessarily be good for the employees. So I would think there's a common interest in coming to some compromise solution on this, and that's what I'm asking you.
I think our major points that pension plans, if we start from the basic premise that pension plans only exist for the beneficiaries, period. Moving away from the contribution holidays, away from the idea of a surplus. If we really put fiduciary duty back into fiduciary duty so companies stop treating these funds as capital investments or tools for other purposes, we're going to look at any solution we can. So the answer is yes, we like lists. We'd like to see much more focus on bonds, long bonds, rather than in the equity market. And just so you know that we're not talking out of hand, the Teamsters Canada plan has less than 2% in the market.
Okay.
And I will tell you, I was very relieved to receive that letter telling me that at the beginning of this year.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Valentini, I just have one very short question for you. There seemed to be one interesting omission from your report, and that is, what was the return on your assets or your investment in the latest year? I didn't hear you give us that statistic.
Yeah. Our year end is March 31st, and we are in the process of completing our year end and are in the midst, again, of completing it and an audit. And we have not, therefore, completed our results, and I feel it would be inappropriate at this time to divulge what they are. We do report on a quarterly basis. We do provide our returns to our respective ministers and stakeholders on a quarterly basis, so they have received them. But our results as at March 31st of this year
So you don't provide your results publicly?
We do provide them, as I said, per our legislation. We submit quarterly financial statements to the President of the Treasury Board and each of the ministries responsible for managing the pension plans.
But are those then made public?
They're not public, no. Per our legislation, they are not required to be public.
I see. Okay. Ms. Mayaska, I think you and Mr. Benson might be on a somewhat different wavelength, and I wondered what you thought of this idea of some sort of quid pro quo in regulatory situation in return for the 10-year payout period.
So just to clarify, what your question would be is what compromises would the plan sponsor community be willing to accept to achieve that 10-year rule, the 10-year funding rule?
That's the gist of it, yes.
Okay. I haven't had a chance to think about that, and so I may ask that we can provide a response back to the committee on that particular question. The position we've taken is that that is a requirement to help ease onerous funding requirements under solvency, and that any additional restrictions, such as putting in place more quantitative limits to further constrain the plan sponsors, would just be counterproductive. So
it sounds like you're wanting to have your cake and eat it too, and not make any compromise.
At this point, I'm not sure that a compromise would achieve anything without creating additional problems. The basis for lobbying to have the quantitative limits removed is because they're arbitrary, and the prudent person standard is more appropriate and is also in keeping with best practices globally. So to put in place restrictions relating to the investments would just be counterproductive. To put in place guidelines relating to the benefits, such as the inability to take contribution holidays, the inability to make changes to the benefits, that's a separate issue.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. McCallum. Monsieur Laforêt, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. My first question is addressed to Mr. Valentini. The investment board, under its definition, is a public sector entity. And earlier, you said that you have no obligation to disclose publicly the return of the assets and capital you hold. Under our obligations, we do have a duty to table an annual report that is introduced by our president. And in fact, if you go to our website, you will have access to our annual report. And that is the time when it is made public. Yes, and it has been made public. In your prepared remarks, you said that the investment board is not an investment manager, is not a pension plan manager, but an investment manager. And that in spite of this, you are well aware of what your obligations are. Contributions minus liabilities is supposed to give you a return, give you what your assets are. That's just the guiding principle. And do you think that has been forgotten? At the PSP, we haven't forgotten this. We have an investment policy, and we do have reference indices. And in fact, we work with the Canadian chief actuary to make sure that the equations remain intact every 3 years. The chief actuary of Canada produces a triannual report on each of the plans that covers our assets. Our strategy, our investment portfolio takes into account all of that. Do the investment managers, do the asset managers receive any bonuses? Do they receive any extra compensation based on the return? Are you talking about incentives? Yes, yes. Just like for the Caisse de dépôt of Quebec. Yes, and very similar to the majority of our peers in the investment manager sector, absolutely. In recent years, did the PSP invest in asset-backed commercial paper? Yes, and that's indicated in our annual report. It's quite explicitly detailed. And as I said during my opening remarks, we did invest in ABCP, and we also participated in the Crawford Committee. In fact, we sat on that committee for 2 years to help resolve some of the problems. So if you did invest in those securities, one can assume that you incurred significant losses. There have been losses, and those losses are attributable to the liquidity crisis and the credit spreads. There has been a detrimental and negative impact on those basic core products that have influenced and that have had an impact on interest rates. And a lot of our objectives have not been achieved, and we do hope that through restructuring activities we'll be able to recover those losses. The Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada said that in 2005 the Bank of Canada had issued several warnings on the very high level of volatility of those securities, of asset-backed commercial paper specifically. So how is it possible that the Public Sector Pension Investment Board continued to invest in commercial paper when you are a federal agency and you are in contact with the Bank of Canada? So how is it that you decided to invest in ABCP when there was only one single credit rating agency, the DBRS, that had given the commercial paper an actual rating when other credit rating agencies had refused to touch it? It's quite distressing. I must admit to you that I'm not aware, and I was not aware of that warning or that report that was published a few years ago. I am aware of what Standards & Poor's had stated officially. This goes back to the beginning of this decade. We know that the DBRS had given the commercial paper a AAA rating, and it was later on bought by Standards & Poor's. The market was working rather efficiently and rather effectively for 20 years, and there wasn't any major problem. There wasn't any rating downgrade for the last 20 years. It represents 40% of the market. Mr. Don Drummond, the vice president, or rather one of the senior officials, chief economists at the TD Bank, appeared before this committee, and in answer to one of our questions, he said that for him it was so obvious, it was basic. The TD Bank did not venture into ABCP because there were not sufficient returns. So how do you square the circle? How is it that one of the major banks in Canada clearly stated that they would not invest in ABCP, and that the Bank of Canada also said it was volatile? Mr. Laforêt, in hindsight, we are able to recognize the risky elements, and obviously liquidity of those securities was underestimated. But when we look at one of the root causes of the problem, it was a problem of liquidity. The very same provisions or the very same securities can be found in other trusts, in other banks. When Canadian banks were called upon to inject liquidity, they did so in their trusts. Do you think that the bonus structure, the bonus compensation structure, had any influence on all of this? Mr. Chair, as I was saying, the product ABCP, that is widely and was widely recognized in the market. And in fact, the market didn't have a lot of depth. It did represent some 40% of the monetary market in Canada. And obviously, the PSP has been negatively impacted, and we have suffered the consequences. We believe that in August, the decision that was made was such that we should compel foreign banks to honor the contracts. And they had done so just as some Canadian banks had carried through with their promises.
Chair, and I want to welcome our witnesses here this morning. Thank you for coming and helping us through this relatively difficult piece. The The issue of solvency is one that's on the table and was previous. But there's one area that the Pension Investment Association brought forward, which more than all welcome to comment to. And I'm personally not sure about where I stand on it, and so I'm going to ask the question. And I'm going to give you an example that happened to me personally, which my colleagues know I like to do. At one time, I was a member of OMERS, and I was a member of a municipal council, and there was a holiday. A payment holiday came along, and I was on council at the time. So the members of OMERS didn't have to pay for a couple of years, I think it was. And the cities didn't have to pay their portion because they were oversubscribed in a sense. They had too much money in the system. Wisely or unwisely, I won't say which, the council of the day decided that we were not going to continue to collect that money from the taxpayer, municipal taxpayer, and that savings would be also passed on to the tax base. The staff wanted to continue to collect that money and save it for a rainy day. But whether that was right or wrong. My first question really is, right now there's a 110% limit. You're advocating, your organization, and anyone can comment to it, to go to at least 125%. Is there any argument that there shouldn't be a limit at all, that when things are great, that we continue to collect money and just keep it in the fund, and then when things do go badly, because let's face it, the economy goes up and down. It hasn't never stopped going up and down, and that money would be there for that rainy day, and we might not be in the same trouble that we're having today. And I would just appreciate the comment of why 125, why not no limit, and just continue to collect on defined benefit plans. And I appreciate your response from anybody who wishes to respond, but we'll start with Barbara, I guess, first.
Mike, just in response, to your example, I do agree completely that the employer-employee contribution holiday that largely arose out of surpluses that did not end up being permanent created some of the problems that we're facing today. And your situation at OMERS probably mirrored the experience of a lot of other plan sponsors and plan beneficiaries. With your specific question on the limits, PIAC has always advocated that there should be no quantitative limits, and I would agree that there is no need to have a limit. And if there has to be a limit because there's a feeling that they should be, it should be at least 125%. So my answer to your question is I do agree that there is an argument that there should be no limit. And that will provide the ability to build a significant cushion that can protect in down markets. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is largely unprecedented in the financial industry, and it goes to show that even very well-funded plans at the beginning of 2007, 2008 found themselves in completely different circumstances following the market downturn. And where that's particularly problematic is on the solvency side, where the solvency calculation is also largely driven by the impact of declining interest rates. As interest rates go down, the value of the liabilities goes up, and that exacerbates the funded situation on a solvency basis.
Mr. Benson, would you like to comment? I'm sure.
Just as a note, I put some articles in your papers that I gave to you about the National Post, 3 articles that basically talk a lot about OMERS and decisions they made. I think this question on the idea of course, we're opposed to the payment holidays, but it's not just talking about payment holidays and percentage of surplus. It doesn't get to the root topic. If you remove them and you ask people to do prudent investment, if companies cannot see any reason for having a surplus, they're not going to have one. They're going to be running at 100%. It's changing the fundamentals of how we deal with them. As long as we're talking about a surplus, we're talking about companies and people viewing, as you did as a councillor, as a way of saving money and passing it on to taxpayers. If that's removed, in other words, if simply the investment structures are properly run, if there is nothing in it for a company to run a surplus, trust me, they won't. Now, when we talk about, as Madame did, about 2007, in 2005 and 6, these same companies were coming, in the time of unprecedented boom, record profit year after year, were coming here claiming relief. We shouldn't be making, in bad times, make bad laws. So,
okay, so
thank you.
let me just follow up on that with you. And I appreciate we had a meeting earlier this week, and you have some very good points. But at the end of the day, right now, the surplus is a tax deduction in a sense for the for the company. And if we have it wide open, it has the potential of being a big tax deduction.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, does that not still, you know, your argument is that we're trying to, you know, the plans are there to protect workers. It's deferred wages. Yeah. Even if that we allow them to have big tax deductions and they stay in business, they still have employees. Does it still not help the employee in the long run that those plans have money for that rainy day that will eventually come around?
When you say the surplus can be 150%, just like this one company I referred to that had 40% in the market, given their demographics, I'm not going to mention them, but I question it. Their investment strategy will be to maximize returns. That's what businesses do, and God bless them. We live in a free enterprise society. It's what they're supposed to do. But you as a regulator has to, I think, has to look at on the beneficiaries are entitled to receive what was promised. If we say that if it's wages, then why not just pass a law that says employers can take $2 or $3 an hour off your paycheck to use it for capital investment? Intellectually, it is no different. I think at the end of the day, we're better off to change the structures to figure out if and when and how we can do it, so that whether it's good times or bad times, pensions are reporting that they have met. The only thing they have met is the requirements of the beneficiaries, not a surplus, not anything else.
That's it. Thank you very much for those answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Benson, for your last statements. It clarifies a lot of things. We heard from the Canadian Association of Actuaries who told us that in the case of bankruptcy proceedings, priority should be given to pensions. Do you agree with that, Mr. Benson?
The department in 2005, I think 7 and 9. Absolutely. They should be workers' wages followed by pension holders.
Je vous remercie beaucoup.
Thank you. Mr. Valentini, Mr. Mallow, welcome this morning. You remind me of Jean Charest, because during the autumn election, he said that he wasn't able to foresee the losses incurred by the Caisse de dépôt, because it was only once the financial statements were made that everyone became aware of the scope of the losses. But everybody knew that the Caisse had lost some $35 to $40 billion, and yet Mr. Charest continued to say that, because technically it was true, and you've delivered the exact same message today. Your exercise has now been concluded, and you know, like us, that you've lost billions and billions of dollars, and yet this morning you're telling us that I couldn't have known otherwise because it was being audited. So I'll ask you the question in other words. Were you aware? Did you know that you were going to lose many billions of dollars this year? Answer. Mr. Mulcair, you simply have to look at our portfolio. Our annual report and our reference indexes are made public. It clearly shows what we made as returns and what we incurred as losses. You'll be able to see for yourself what the returns were. The returns on ABCP this year will probably be similar to other pension plans that lost major capital. Mr. Valentini, is there anything in your own rules that prevents you from telling parliamentarians what the real situation is? I've already lost 2 minutes. Did you know, yes or no, that you would be losing billions and billions of dollars at the end of this last fiscal year? Yes or no? I'm telling you, Mr. Mulcair, that we've posted the same losses as our peers. 1/3 time, Mr. Valentini. And I think this is really bordering on contemptuous behavior. Yes or no? Did you lose billions of dollars?
Well, if we take equity market returns that have been in the negative, I mean, the U.S. equities and Canadian equities have lost you know,
Answer
in the
the
30
question,
to 40%,
Mr. Valentini.
the answer would be yes. I mean, the number would be in the billions,
Thank you.
for sure.
Now, you have this wonderful way with words. You have a way of talking about the compensation.
You talk about compensation relative to returns.
Is anyone at your investment group, at the PSP Investments, is anyone thinking of paying themselves a bonus this year? Because I've had it explained to me that you're actually thinking of trying to analyze your rendement over a 4-year period and trying to find a way to rationalize giving yourselves bonuses. I hope that's not true, but I'd like to give you a chance to say whether it's true or not.
The decision to pay bonuses, and page 31 to 35, I think, of our annual report is quite explicit and provides detail on how our compensation policies work. And frankly, it is the board of directors that decide whether management gets paid or not. It is not management.
Well, let me just put it to you this way, Mr. Valentini. Now that I have you and Mr. Mallow here, and this is televised, and you can send messages back to your board of directors, as I'm doing right now. Anyone in this country running something called an investment board that lost billions of dollars last year, who even thinks about paying themselves a bonus, needs their head read. And I'd like you to give that message to your board of directors on behalf of my party, that we would find it properly scandalous if, in the light of what happened last year, that in addition to your considerable salaries, you decide to vote yourself bonuses. Would you be kind enough to pass that along for us?
I'll pass them the message.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Urquhart, with regard to the presentation that was made, and I had the great fortune to hear your presentation that you made with Officer Logan, you make reference to the fact that IMET is insufficient. I'd like you to elaborate on that for us, if you wouldn't mind.
First of all, the IMET spends $40 million a year on securities crime policing, and according to the feedback that we have from the Toronto Police Services Fraud Squad and other fraud squads of Canada, as of 2003, the RCMP took effective exclusive jurisdiction. The RCMP in the white-collar securities crime area, notwithstanding having spent in excess of $30 million per year since 2003, has been successful in only 2 prosecutions where individuals were found to have been guilty of securities fraud and have been placed in Canadian prison. This is an abysmal performance relative to the amount of money that has been spent and relative to the amount of prosecutions that have been taking place in the United States. We are not of the view that there is no securities fraud in Canada. We are of the view that the RCMP has not competently produced its investigations and prosecutions, and recently we have determined that one of the reasons why this is the case is that they seek to have their investigations approved by the investment industry.
30 seconds.
While I agree with almost everything you've said and with the analysis that you and Mr. Logan make, there's one part where quite clearly we don't agree. I don't see how the creation of a new structure, a new institution that would be a national regulator, for example, in Quebec, the Autorité des marchés financiers has done an excellent job of prosecuting, and people like Vincent Lacroix are in jail for 10 years on securities fraud because there's a good prosecution team.
Okay.
You've correctly said there's a problem, not a problem with resources, but how does changing structures answer the problem?
First of all, I want to make it clear that we're not talking about a National Securities Commission, and we believe that the authority is the Securities Commission and that its best skills and its jurisdictional territory is in the administration of the Quebec Securities Act. Okay. What we're proposing is a passport model, a federal and provincial securities crime unit, which comprises of police experts who are going to allocate investigations to Quebec,
then
where
we
Quebec
agree
has
even on
proper
that.
jurisdiction.
Thank
so I
you.
think we agree.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. McCabe, please.
Chair, thank you, witnesses. And I wanted to reinforce Mr. Mulcair's comments, Mr. Valentini. Frankly, it would be inappropriate for your organization to be awarding themselves significant bonuses in light of not only your performance in the market, but the market conditions. Canadians have taken a pretty major haircut in the market in the last while, and it seems to me that even if you have outperformed the market, even if you've done better than the market, that it would be inappropriate for people who are controlling these vast sums of money to do the to be awarding themselves significant compensation above and beyond normal, because we do not live in normal times. Though I did want to ask Ms. Mars a question with respect to PIAC's Proposal 1C, permitting plan sponsors to establish special purpose accounts. Whose accounts are they? Are they the sponsor's account or are they the plan's account?
Sorry. The account would be held separately from the sponsor's assets and separately from the pension plan trust assets.
Who's the owner?
I think the rules for ownership would be complex and it would depend on the situation. However, it would provide the ability for the plan sponsor to access those assets in times when the plan was in a fully funded position.
And if there's a bankruptcy, who gets it?
I think that in the situation of a bankruptcy, you wouldn't see yourself in the situation that a plan sponsor would be able to set up such an account.
No, you're setting this account up when you've got more money than you need. That's the point, isn't it?
Okay. A bankruptcy situation would probably not lend itself to having the ability to set that up.
I understand that,
yeah.
But what I'm saying is you'd never set that up when you're going in bankruptcy. You'd only set it up when you've got more money than you need. So, you know, the economic cycle goes up, the economic cycle goes down. Who gets the dough when you go down?
If the account was set up for the purpose of plan funding, and if that funding was required in the event that the company failed and the plan was wound down, it would go to the plan. And if there was a fully funded pension plan in that situation, it would revert back to the sponsor, and then I would...
So is the plan the preferred creditor in a situation of that kind?
I can't answer that question because I don't know. It would depend on the specific circumstances.
Well, it's a rather significant issue if, in fact, this is a proposal to ameliorate the risk. Letters of credit, your B point here. I've never met a letter of credit that can't be revoked. So if in fact you're meeting your solvency requirements with letters of credit and the company is in financial difficulty, doesn't that actually create a whipsaw effect so that the company not only now has problems with its bank and problems with its balance sheet, but now it has has an additional problem with its pension plan because it didn't sponsor the pension plan with cash, it sponsored the pension plan with credit. Doesn't that, in fact, accelerate your difficulties rather than decelerate your difficulties?
The proposal is centered around financially strong companies, and the ability to use a letter of credit provides a security for the pension plan, and it also does, as you say, there are letters of credit can be revoked. The financial health of the particular plan sponsor will dictate whether or not that plan sponsor is able to put a letter of credit in place. So again, this proposal is based on the scenario where you have a financially strong plan sponsor that has the credit facilities in place to put up the letter of credit, which means they're not putting the money into the pension plan, which at some point in the future...
But we're here talking about companies that are on the margins, companies that are really on the edge. You're begging for relief. And so, but you come along with a proposal which effectively only would affect companies that don't need relief, companies that are already strong, because the only people who are going to get letters of credit from the banks are strong companies.
Just very briefly.
Very briefly, PIAC's constituency is a lot broader in that we represent corporate plans, public sector, and quasi-public sector plans. And so when we're looking at asking for relief, the reason why we're asking for relief is because the solvency funding requirements can actually put a financially strong company into jeopardy because the requirements are onerous based on the existing rules.
Okay, thank you. Monsieur Carrier, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Carrier, over to you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I sympathize greatly with the arguments laid out by Ms. Smith on behalf of the United Senior Citizens of Ontario. I think you accurately depict the situation being lived by pensioners who are obviously being hard hit by the very steep economic fluctuations. I want to readdress the major issue here, that is the loss of returns that have been caused by poor investments, investments made by so-called experts. And with respect to bonuses based on return, let's talk about that. When people receive bonuses of some $100,000s of dollars, sometimes millions of dollars, notwithstanding the results that have arisen from their decisions, is something that I want to ask Mr. Valentini about. What do you think of that practice? Earlier, you stated that the Board of Directors will decide on its own policies, but nonetheless, I'd like to hear your opinion. Don't you believe you do carry significant responsibilities, and do you agree with that situation that bonuses should be handed out to experts or employees on a short-term basis, and when the long-term return on a pension plan is negative? That's only one component of the issue. You have to understand many components. Bonuses are routine practices within the sector. I can tell you that today that the reference portfolio of the PSP, which is the core portfolio, is ranked amongst the very best. And in fact, according to the RBC Dexia analysis, our portfolio is the very best. We have the most rigorous and the most robust portfolio among our peers. So that puts us in a really good position. And according to a study that I was able to be involved in last year, showed that among the largest funds, we were entirely in the norm. So our reference is very good. But with respect to bonuses, I want to hear your specific opinion. Don't you think it's going to have a detrimental effect on the pension funds? Don't you think that the bonus structure should be legislated and that even it should be eliminated, quite possibly? Mr. Carrier, compensation is something that is governed by our Board of Directors. Incentives are structured on a long-term basis, and it is entirely in keeping with industry practices. But I want to talk about those very famous industry practices. I think it is entirely false and wrong to pay people bonuses. Obviously, you have an expert committee that evaluates and assesses risk. So why pay an individual a bonus because he was able to bring in a certain return? Don't you think that there's going to be bad consequences following that? We're very much aware of the consequences. Nobody is given an incentive based on one single year of performance. It's usually based on a longer period that is staggered out. Generally speaking, performance-based bonuses are a function of long-term portfolio performance. You have 30 seconds, Mr. Carrier. I'd like to hear your opinion, Ms. Maizaga. What do you believe to be the bonus compensation plan to be? Don't you think that it should be modified in order to prevent future problems?
Our organization is an organization that's made up of volunteers. So we can't specifically respond to the issue of salaries and bonuses because there are none related to PIAC, other than we have an executive director. So if you're asking me my opinion, my opinion is that the compensation practices for each organization should be determined by the board of directors, and they should be transparent, and they should be based on long-term objectives.
Merci. We'll go to Mr. Decker, please.
For your presentations this morning. Mr. Valentini, you mentioned in your presentation that the PSP has made investments into asset classes such as private equity investments, real estate, and infrastructure, which actually have performed quite well and in many cases have outperformed the markets. Could you give us a specific flavor of some of those investments for illustration purposes?
Yeah, commonly what they're referred to as alternative asset classes. Back in 2004, when we diversified our portfolio, we started to develop, and actually haven't been able to reap the benefits like many other big funds because we just started to develop them in 2004, and that's real estate, infrastructure, and private equity. When we benchmarked our 2004 diversification strategy, which included these investments, and we benchmarked it against our index portfolio, which was prior to 2004, we've added $1.6 billion in added value as of the last fiscal year. As I mentioned before, I did a similar exercise and looked at the major peers like Teachers, OMERS, and CASE. Each one of these asset classes, for each one of these funds, and each asset class individually outperformed the total overall fund, thereby outperforming public markets. These are asset classes that have performed very well. We've been developing them. We've benefited from them. I had done an exercise, a pro forma exercise as well. Had we benefited from our targeted exposures, had we been able to have full target and been a mature fund, our performance would have been, 1.5% higher on a 4-year basis ending last year. So clearly, these are assets that are only accessible. You have to be big. And as people know, infrastructure is getting a lot of profile these days. I mean, this is a good asset class. It's predictable cash flows. It's inversely correlated to the markets. Markets have been going down 30, 40%. You'll see some people have already released results. Infrastructure returns are positive. So basically, it has been our strategy since 2004. And I think I gave you the sense of what are the benefits of that.
So in your view, if pension funds such as yours were restricted from making those kinds of investments, it would be detrimental to the pension beneficiaries that you represent?
I believe, just if, the data I've seen that I've quoted on the large pension funds, just a 1.5% we could have benefited from, clearly reflects we could have, added to the real return that ultimately, yes, has an impact on the equation of pension funds that I mentioned in my presentation. That could have an impact on contributions, definitely.
Thank you. Mr. Benson, you have mentioned that you think that the pension should be restricted in the types of investments they should be made. What's your response to the types of investments that Mr. Valentini was just describing?
In the long run, we are all dead. That, again, when we're looking at investment structures and investment analysis, we're talking about performance bonuses. So there's even something in there for people to try to outperform the market. When we're talking about pensions, there's no reason or need to outperform anything. The only reason they exist, it's not to save money necessarily for a taxpayer. The only reason they exist, one reason. The performance bonus should be, guess what, folks? We're in a recession, tough times, but don't worry, your pension's still there. That's a performance bonus. It's not talking about layered investments, about how we plan. The only reason it exists is to pay that money out. And say in the long run, we're all dead. But whatever we did in the past, this one recession is going to wipe it all out real quick. Why? Because investments were made to conventional wisdom in all the right places. But in the long run, it's the pensioners that are going to be hurt. The people who run at this board, the people who look after it, the people who pay into it are all going to be fine. If they fail, the workers are in trouble.
Can I ask you, you mentioned bonds,
Yep.
the bond market, and and your view is that it's performed better than the equity market. Yeah. So are we talking corporate bonds, or are we talking strictly government bonds?
That I'll leave to our actuaries.
Okay.
I imagine they have a blend, but they're doing fine.
So your view is that
by the way,
corporate bonds would be okay, but
Yeah.
but what if corporate bonds underperform the types of investments that Mr. Valentini is talking about?
Again, we're talking
not without
about
risk.
on a long run on a particular model.
Right.
Now, I'm not an actuary, I'm not a bond buyer. I do understand a little bit about economics. I would think in the long run, if this particular investment is totally safe, if it's going to guarantee what we have to do, that meets your fiduciary duty, not your best luck. Mm-hmm. How you do it, I'll leave to the experts. But in the long run, our workers want to make sure they have pension.
One follow-up question, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Benson, do you believe that the Canadian pension regulatory framework should be competitive with other jurisdictions, such as, say, the United States, the United Kingdom, where Canadians compete for jobs?
Short and sweet, we live in Canada, and I think it's important for you to look after Canadians. Yes, we compete in a global market, but that doesn't mean we should be lowering standards or lowering. If they have best practices that are better than ours or can help us, we should, of course, be looking at them.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Pachetti, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses. It's always interesting to look at this aspect, but it's a troubling. It's a troubling area because I think we're all looking in retrospect as what happened, and we're looking for solutions as to making sure that this doesn't repeat itself. And some of the things that I've heard this morning doesn't necessarily comfort me, and I'm not sure we could reconcile the different points of view between Mr. Benson and perhaps Mr. Valentini, but I'm going to try. John, pleasure to have you here. I see here in your written submission, you say in an ideal world, the net contribution that we receive could be invested in Canadian government inflation-linked bonds. So what's wrong with that? Why do you have to diversify? Why don't you just invest in bonds like Mr. Benson was saying? Do you need to take the risks? And do we have to legislate that and say, no, you have to stick to bonds? So what is it?
I'd like to turn it, Pierre, if you want to take that question.
Yes. There are some problems in being invested 100% into real return bonds or bonds. The first problem is that there is probably not enough of these bonds available right now. If you are to sum up all the pensions assets actually being managed in Canada, you would be something in the vicinity of $1.5 trillion. Now, the real return bond market in Canada is only $35 billion worth. So we're talking a multiplier of 45 or 60 times. So in other words, the money to be managed in Canada by pension plans outside of the real the RRSPs, the amount of money to be managed is 45 times bigger than the available.
So how do we relieve the pressure? So I think being diversified is justifiable. So how do we relieve the pressure and avoid institutions like yourselves, Mr. Valentini, to go out and get that extra 1/4 point like the Caisse de dépôt did? That was their rationale, and I think Banque Nationale used the same rationale. They went for that extra 1/4 point, 1/8% on certain of these instruments. Not worth the risk. I understand you did the analysis, but you relied on experts, and obviously the experts failed. So I'm having a trouble reconciling the fact that we use experts, but the experts have not done their job, and they get paid anyway. So why not just simplify things and just make it easy so that we are going to have funds for the use that they're supposed to be used for in the future? So do we need to go out and get that extra 1/8%? Same thing when you're going to invest in real estate. I think you're going to have the same problem in the real estate market. If it's not this year, it could be in the next 5 years. So you're going to come back in 4 or 5 years and say, well, we didn't forecast that there was going to be a recession in the real estate market, but it'll come back. And then I know that you're an accountant, and you'll be able to flip the numbers and show us, that you were great in terms of certain peers and not so good in other peers, and so it'll be fine. And then, things go on. But in the end, it is either the taxpayers that pay, or it's the pensioner or the contributor. So how do we avoid that in the future? That's the real question.
Well, the way we manage the risk, and it is a very rigorous process. We establish a portfolio that we think over the long term, over a period of at least a 10-year horizon. You don't build portfolios on 1 year and market timing events. You have to build them on a long-term basis. And we build them, and we build a portfolio, and it's in conjunction as well with our sponsors and the Chief Actuary of Canada in doing his equation, because as we managed, its assets have to equal the liabilities. We manage the assets, and we have to take the liabilities into consideration. And we do work with the Chief Actuary of Canada to build a portfolio, and that is going to meet that at a
so you have a
level
10-year.
of risk.
Sorry to interrupt because our time is limited, but you have a 10-year horizon and you have an asset mix. When do you change that, or do you say, look, we've got a 10-year horizon, we're going to stick to 1/3 bonds, 1/3 stock, 1/3 real estate, and 10% cash?
We have a thorough review on a triennial basis at the same time as the triennial report from the OCA. But we also review every year and recommend to the board courses of action. So it is reviewed on a very regular basis.
If we take the last 12 months, you'd had decided to invest, I'm not sure what your amount was, but let's say 1/3 in ABCPs. What's going to happen this year when those ABCPs are no longer around? Thankfully, around, thankfully.
Well, again, the portfolio is reviewed annually. ABCP dealt with money markets, which are part of the portfolio, and money market investments. The commercial paper was one of them, and that was, I think, an unusual event that happened.
We're going to have unusual events on something else in the next little while. So I just want a quick question.
Okay.
Just one quick question.
Sorry, we're over time here, Mr. Pachetti.
No, just the crime units.
But you will have another. There is another Liberal round. So.
Just under what department did the crime unit that she was suggesting? Part of public safety. Thanks.
Peter Van Loan, and also to the Standing Committee of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for respecting my time limit, and I'll go to Mr. Bernier.
Blame it on the witness who answered.
Mr. Bernier.
Me donner quelques temps pour.
I want to take a few moments to ask a few questions. Firstly, thank you for being here. Mr. Chair, by the way, I'll be sharing my time with my colleague, Mr. Cramp. So as I was saying, thank you for being here this morning. You know that we are undertaking a study on a very important issue for all Canadians, and so thank you for taking the time to make your presentations before us. It's greatly appreciated. As you know, we are mere parliamentarians. We are not experts in pension plans, and that's exactly why we are carrying out this type of exercise. It is to understand what the best interest will be for Canadians over the long term. So I'd like to know how regulations are applied in Canada. And my question is for each one of you. As you know, the federal government regulates only about 7% of pension plans in Canada. Everything else falls under provincial jurisdiction. We have 13 provinces that are responsible for regulating in a wide array of areas. And there are some areas such as securities that fall under provincial jurisdiction. Do you believe that the federal regulatory framework is properly harmonized with its provincial counterpart? And do you think that there should be better collaboration with our provincial and territorial partners? Do we need to perhaps consider an intergovernmental entity that will coordinate collaboration, or do you believe that there's absolutely no problem, that everything is perfect and that the current regulatory framework is just fine? I don't know who wishes to speak first. Ms. Menska, would you like to answer first?
Yes, I can Just to clarify, your question is concerning the regulatory regime, and do we think that we would benefit from an intergovernmental body to coordinate And yes, I do agree, and I think that there's two areas where there's a problem, and one, as you mentioned, is on the pension regulation side, and the other one is on the securities regulation side, and that affects all capital market players because it adds to the complexity. And the more administrative complexity there is, the more time-consuming, and it just creates an extra layer of work that's really not adding any value. So yes, I do agree that it would be better to have better coordination for pension law, better coordination for securities law. I also would submit that the federal government would be a key player and should take a lead role in achieving that. I think that the biggest challenge is that everyone is not going to agree, as always.
Merci. Monsieur Benson?
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir. Just to clarify that even though the federal government or the federal sector may have 7% of pensions in Canada, partly because of the nature of our work, we have the highest concentration of union membership in the private sector under the federal jurisdiction. So for us, our greatest concern is what you do here dealing with federal plans. So I'm going to limit it to that. We're never really opposed to regulation, though we will say perhaps some of the ZDR ones might not be in line. But when it comes to protecting people's income and money, that's something we certainly support. So for us, the harmonization issue and the provincial issue is not, at this moment, at least at this time, as big as in fact. It is critical to a large amount of our members what you do in the federal pension world.
Merci. Madame Smith, voulez-vous ajouter quelque chose?
Ms. Smith, would you like to add something?
Securities for all of Canada, because right now, as far as I understand, when I was in England and in Europe, we're a laughing stock with all those countries. So I think we need something, and it comes out in this here report that I gave of how the seniors have been lost their income and lost their capital and almost everything they have. So we need some securities here in Canada.
Merci. Yeah, I'd just like to add the comment. I'm on the Investment Committee of the United Church of Canada, and we're a governance body for the external management of the pension plan for the ministers and staff of the United Church. And I want to make a point about corporate governments. I don't think it's appropriate for governments to give prescriptive rules on exactly what to invest in and what is denied and what should be the appropriate percentages. So I agree with the prudent man concept and that they be held to account in a court of law for negligence for not following the prudent man. But I do want to make an observation that the corporate governance of the major pension plans of Canada, and particularly the public plans, have been stalked by corporate executives, bank executives, consultants, and individuals who have been in the same club, who seek to have the same high compensation in their own organization. And so on a reciprocal basis, they've been extremely accommodating on the part of the compensation consultants to permit the pension fund managers to be paid like corporate chief executive officers. We've got problems in both the CEO market and the pension fund market in that regard.
Okay. Thank you, Monsieur Bernier. Martha Hall-Finley, 5 minutes.
Just a lighthearted comment. I keep hearing the concept of the prudent man, and I would really relish at some point having that term be the prudent person requirement. Could you, though there are many prudent women, Ms. Mayaska, could you just tell me how many Canadians are beneficiaries under defined benefit plans?
I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but if I could just start by saying the PIAC submission does specify prudent person.
And we thank you for that.
You're welcome. It is in the order of millions. I don't have the statistics in front of me. I believe the statistics are in the submission that we sent on the 13th of March. If you would like that detail, we can certainly provide it after the meeting as a follow-up.
Just as a curiosity, yes, that would be great. And I have a larger, I guess it's a comment, and that's that ultimately money doesn't grow on trees, and we have pension plans in order to provide pensioners with income after they stop working. And I understand the desire to make sure that the money there is more money available for that than there might otherwise be. And I understand the desire to have the cost of the money going into the pension plans being as small as possible, because whether they're contributory or non-contributory, no one wants to pay more than they have to pay into these plans. And so there's clearly an incentive, once there is money in a plan, to make the most use of that money in terms of generating revenue. And of course, what we now see is that there was perhaps too great an incentive to maximize the return and too great an incentive to engage in greater risk. And so I think there's an understanding that we would all like to see a greater balance, but recognizing that part of that balance includes a desire to not have too much going into the plan in the first place. So that's just a general comment. I had a question for Monsieur Malo. My colleague had asked a question about in the ideal world, the net contributions that we receive would be invested in Canadian government inflation-linked bonds. And I think you answered that there were two answers. The first one was that there just isn't enough of a market out there. I don't know that we got to the second one. Could you actually provide the second part of that answer, please?
Thank you for coming back with the second portion. The second problem with the real return bonds is their yield. And again, we go back to the original basic equation of a pension plan. So the net contributions plus investment returns have to equal the present value of the future benefits paid to the employees. Now, the actual rate, the rate on the real return bonds, now Canadian bond, we're talking Canadian government bonds, obviously, so that we don't have any risk, any company risk or whatever of names and stuff like that. So it's really riskless inflation-linked bonds. Those yields now for 25 to 30-year maturity is about 2%. Now, you know, if you invest 100% of your assets into a 2% return, I can tell you right away that the contributions rate will have to go up in order to pay the future benefits. There is no magic into this equation, quite frankly. It's a give and take. And so if you start from that point that you cannot be invested because the cost to the contributors would be too much, then it means you have to move into other asset classes that you hope will bring more returns and therefore maintain the contributions level to where the sponsors and the employees want it to be.
And thank you very much, because that's exactly to my earlier point, that yes, the money doesn't grow on trees, and if you don't have enough revenue based on the assets in the fund, your contribution rate is going to have to go up.
Yes.
So my final part of this question is to Mr. Benson. We have heard a number of criticisms from you, and I think we're all trying to come to a solution. So it's a very important discussion to balance the need to keep contribution levels as low as we can with the risk, because I would suggest if you're looking for other assets that have greater revenue, you're probably looking at other assets that may have greater risk. So, Mr. Benson, my question to you is, if the answer is greater contributions, I've heard criticism, but I haven't heard real concrete solutions from you or concrete suggestions. If you can provide some, that would be great.
Well, I mean, obviously, when we're talking about, first, 100% bonds, it's going to be appropriate for some, depending on the demographics of a unit, would depend upon investments. Obviously, if it's an older unit, you're going to be in more bonds and cash. If you've got a bunch of younger people, you might be a little bit invested in other things. We're talking here, when they were talking about trying to make a quarter point more or 1.25 points more, to quote Mr. Mallow, on the hope that we will make more. Yes, if it means more contributions, it may mean more contributions. If it means that we have to pay a bit more, we may. But the one company I did mention, it's a real example, could have paid $35 to $40 million a year over 15 years of boom to have a perfectly safe plan, chose not to, and has put itself in a situation of 150 over 10 or 300 million over 5. It makes good, prudent business sense as well to not play games with these pension plans, so we don't end up with GM facing these huge potential crises. It's not just about, in a sense, we're arguing it's not just about the worker guaranteeing getting the retirees. Companies need help. This is sound management for companies to put them on really good footings so that they can go and create work and create jobs.
Okay.
We'll leave the asset management to the experts.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Cramp, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to our guests. If I could, Mr. Urquhart, I'd like to discuss just for a bit this approach of prosecuting the securities fraud. You're telling us that it's almost like asking a criminal if he wants to be investigated. In other words, going to obviously the different securities agencies and getting their permission before they can be investigated. That sort of bothers me. To what extent is that actually happening?
I've got a letter from Dean Buzza on December, approximately the 13th of 2008. It was in response to our request on behalf of a number of ABCP victims that the RCMP conduct a criminal investigation of the asset-backed commercial paper on the basis of our allegations of fraud with respect to the contracting of the ABCP. In that letter, he defines what are the procedures of the RCMP, and it's very clearly stated, and I can table it with the committee, that no commander unit of the RCMP will conduct an investigation of a securities crime complaint until it has been referred by the requirements of the federal government, whoever that is, that it must go to the Joint Consultation Unit.
And you will table that with the committee?
Yes,
then?
I can table that.
Thank you very much. So if we're looking at this, and there's sort of three elements in prosecution. One is either having the teeth, or the capacity to do so. The other is having the expertise. And then the third, of course, is having the independence. Would you rank those in particular order? Would independence basically be
I think
the number one?
in a democracy, which is founded on the rule of law, the independence of the police, not only from the government, but also those whom they investigate, is paramount. And so I would put the independence of the police at the top of the list. I would follow that by competency.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps, Mrs. Smith, you represent a significant number of seniors, and many seniors are astute investors, but there are a great many seniors really who do not and are not aware of the sophistication of the particular vehicles and or market possibilities that are out there right now. Do you find that the broad middle range of the people that you represent, is there any anecdotal and or empirical evidence that they've either been guilty of either misleading information or deliberate fraud?
Yes, misinformation is the biggest one that is coming out from most of my people. It seems that they have been, we've been brought up to trust people as a senior. And the younger generation are not on the same wavelength as we were brought up to be. And so they have trusted their investor, and now they're at this stage where they've lost everything. And it may be their neighbor, it may be their friend down the road, or it may be their bank where they've dealt all these years.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Perhaps, Mr. Valentini, the Pension Benefit Standard Act of 1985 set the particular ratios for the voting shares. That pension plans cannot own 30% more of the voting shares and or more than 10% of their portfolio in a single investment. Do you still adhere to that standard within the public pension?
We have similar our regulations. We don't comply with with that act. We have to comply with our own act, which has similar restrictions. And I understand that that is under review. There is a study, and PSP has put a submission in where we favor the lifting of those restrictions. Simple reason being, we feel, especially when I talked about certain of the transactions like an infrastructure and private investments, those restrictions put limitations on the types of transactions we can do in some of these asset classes. So we did submit a submission to the effect where we favor the lifting of those limitations.
Okay, thank you. Well, and I think evidence has been given today, both quoting this from Mr. Benson, quite frankly, how and why and what those limitations should be, and your opposing position as well. But Mr. Benson, with regard to the actual voting share breakdown and or the percentage of investment. I think you are more concerned not as much with the percentage as it is the component of the investment vehicle itself and what it should contain. Would that be correct?
Exactly. Yes, it's much more dealing with the component and not what it necessarily entails.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cramp. We'll go to Monsieur Mulcair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You won't be surprised that I'll be continuing my very pleasant conversation with Mr. Valentini. I want to quote him in a response that he gave to my colleague. He said several times that his company, his firm, was within the industry practices. You're talking about the industry, Mr. Valentini, and I know that you, like me, have worked in the private sector, but I just want to make sure that we agree on the basic premises of this conversation. We're not talking about a private firm. We're talking about something that belongs to Canadians, an entity that is 100% owned by Canadians. There's not a penny of privately owned money. Can we agree on that? I agree entirely. And in fact, when I was comparing standards, I was comparing the standards that we apply and other pensions apply, such as the teacher's pension plan. So my reference to the standards refer to the standards used by our peers as well. So when you are talking about the industry, you're not trying to convince us that you are a private firm. You just say you use the term a private or industry in generic terms. Yes, because I'm referring to pension plans because we are an investment board, and we can be compared to other pension plans such as the Caisse de dépôt, the Teacher's Pension Plan, CPP. And when I draw those comparisons, I will state once again that PSP ranks within the very top class of our peers. You'll understand why I want to continue this conversation with you, Mr. Valentini. So I am interpreting from your words that you are trying to provide rationale that based on your return, your compensation can be boosted. That's what I'm drawing from your remarks. And you're saying that compared to your other peers, you're not doing so bad. But in fact, you lost billions and billions of dollars last year, and I'll quote you exactly as you were answering a question about ABC paper. You said that the risk concerning the liquidity of ABC paper was underestimated. You state that because you didn't carry out your work properly, you did so poorly, you lost billions of dollars. But how can you persist in saying that compared to other pension funds, you're not doing so badly? I think you are trying to set the groundwork to pay yourselves bonuses. Am I right or wrong? I think you're wrong. Mr. Mulcair, we obviously didn't get a 100% return on our investments. There were some things that we did poorly. There were some losses that were incurred. But we know that we also performed relatively well in other areas. But if we talk about ABC paper, I can spend the next 15 minutes talking about the good things that we did with ABC paper. It's clear that for any pension fund, any investment fund, certain areas will give a higher return than others. I understand that, but you have to acknowledge the fact that you lost billions of dollars. Those billions of dollars belong to the public. And when you talk about industry standards, you are comparing yourself to the industry. All I'm insisting on saying is the following. You must communicate to your other partners on the board of directors the following information. If they think that they deserve more, they can go into the private sector, in fact, where they can get bonuses. But for now, right now, as we speak, they are responsible for a public sector board. And in the public sector, when billions of dollars are lost, they cannot pay themselves bonuses. Can we agree on that? I heard your comments. And once again, we are not comparing ourselves to the private sector. We are comparing ourselves to other pension funds within the public sector. Thank you, Mr. Valentini.
Here today for your responses to our questions. If you have anything further you'd like to submit on pensions, please feel free to do so. Colleagues, we do have 15 minutes, but we do have some future business items we do need to discuss very briefly, particularly the credit card issue. So I will thank the witnesses, and they can excuse themselves, and we will continue on with our discussion. Okay, let's suspend for 2 minutes, and we'll come right back. Ask you to find your seats, please, and we need to discuss future business. You should all have a calendar in front of you. We obviously have one more meeting with respect to pensions under the access to credit issue. We have the Governor of the Bank of Canada on the 28th. We have which should be our final meeting on April 30th with respect to the access to credit, unless members want a further meeting. I do want to raise the issue of the credit card study. I know it's being debated in the House today, so we'll obviously have that vote before we have the study, but it's still the will of, welcome to the wonderful world of Parliament. But the reality is we have a motion here, and Industry Committee has a motion to study the credit card issue. I've been in discussions with the Chair of Industry, and we've tried to come up with a proposal to make to both committees. I mean, there are two options. One is that both committees study the issue, try to focus on different areas. Industry would try to focus on competition. We would try to focus more on the credit or the consumer issue. I mean, that's a challenge because you're obviously dealing with the same witnesses. So our proposal is that we do a joint committee. Our session is 9 to 11, Tuesday, Thursday. Their session is Tuesday, Thursday, 3:30 to 5:30. Now, the chair of that committee says that they're pretty much booked up till May the 7th. So the option we have is we could do it on Tuesday, May the 12th, Thursday, May the 14th, from 9 to 11, 3:30 to 5:30. We've got, I think, a good organization in terms of witnesses. The challenge is having 24 members, so well, Vice Chair raised that. So I don't know whether parties think perhaps they could sub in so we actually only end up with 12 members around the committee, or 13 or 14 rather than 24. But I wanted to get your reaction to that. And if this committee agrees to that, then perhaps we could have the two subcommittees meet and do the specific logistics if we had to. But that's my proposal. That's what the Chair of Industry is going to propose to his committee this afternoon. So I'd like to hear the reaction to that. Mr. McKay?
Did respond, a committee of 24 is unworkable. And I can't imagine anybody wanting to really participate in that. What about a joint subcommittee? And the subcommittee would be equally composed of the two committees.
I'm certainly open to that if that's okay with members of this committee. Mr. Mulcair?
I think it's a great idea for the Joint Committee, and frankly, 24 is not the end of the world.
So you prefer 24 to 12?
Yeah. You know, and let people make their own logistics. They don't have to have the whole group the whole time. But I don't think that we should start micromanaging that. Just say that it's a joint committee. That means that the members of both committees can show up, and we'll stretch the table.
Okay, thank you.
I come from a family of 10 kids, so it's never intimidated me to have a lot of people around the table.
Yeah. Yeah. We should never reveal biographical information. So, Mr. Wallace, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm one of the fortunate ones to be on both industry and on finance. I think I might be the only one. So I'm actually quite in favor of a joint meeting, and I'm flexible on the numbers. I think maybe slightly bigger than 12, maybe not required all 24, and that we're able as members to come at different times and participate. I just think, you know, we have a study going on in banking in Senate, and then we're going to have them come for our committee and then the industry committee. It's just, I just think it's good use of time, ours or theirs. So a joint, I'm in favor of us, you and the chair of the other committee, working out a possibility of joint, because I do not think you can separate the issues from debit cards to credit cards, the fees that the merchants are paying, the fees that the consumers are paying. It's just all going to be one big item at the end of the day. And I think better for parliamentarians that there's one report, and that's what would come out of this.
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. Pachetti, I have Mr. Cramp, and then Mr. Lafarre.
At this point, let me start with a question. When are you proposing it again? The meetings?
Well, the proposal, because industry is committed to the May 7th, it would be May 12th and 14th, or we could do it May 26th and 28th.
But initially, that would be just 4 meetings then.
4 meetings, yes.
See, because I would have been in favor of I would be in favor of what Mr. McKay stated if we were to have 20 meetings. But if we're going to limit it to 4, I don't have a problem with the joint meeting, and then within our own parties we'll decide who's in attendance. So whether it's be 12 or 24, like Mr. Mulcair says, we just stretch the table. If we decide to have 20 meetings, then I think it's inefficient use of our time. So I have no problem doing a joint committee. I mean, if it's limited to 4 meetings, then I think it's fine. But I think if we're going to stretch it out, then it becomes a problem in terms of logistics.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Cramp.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually in concurrence with Mr. McKay. I think 24 is unworkable. Each party can figure out who they wish to have there. Otherwise, our time is going to be down to a minute or 2 or 3 per witness. That's not going to be adequate if we wish to balance that. So let's just leave it with the normal committee structure, the normal precedent that is there for witnesses that when they attend, how many minutes we have, the 7 down to the 5, etc. And each party will work out its own internal representation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lafarre.
I agree with what Mr. Cramp says. I do think 24 is much too high a number. I think we have to be effective. We need to prove that we care about this. Otherwise, even the witnesses risk becoming confused. And that's obviously not our goal. So will the 4 meetings be held during the afternoon? So it will be scheduled from 3:30 to 5:30?
Proposal is to have it May 12th, 9 to 11 a.m. during the normal finance slot, and 3:30 to 5:30 during the normal industry slot, and then on the 14th in the same times. And I think we're not that far apart. I think the proposal is,
Okay.
I mean, we have 5 conservatives on the side now. Perhaps we could have 6 or 7 or 8. The conservatives don't have to send 10. The Bloc could send 3. The NDP could have 2 or 3. It's not. I don't think we're that far apart, frankly.
OK. OK. Donc, le 12, le matin et l'après-midi.
All right, so on the 12th and the 14th, we're going to have morning and afternoon sessions, 2 sessions per day. Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if the clerk could send information for this current study and for future studies, for future meetings, that is, the list of witnesses as suggested by other political parties. That would allow us to see who indeed is going to be appearing and avoid any double invitations from being sent out.
In discussion with the researchers, there was a thought of having the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Retail Council of Canada, those who have real concerns about the credit card and the merchant discount rates. You could have the financial institutions. You could have the associations like Moneris or the companies like Moneris that are split off. And then you have Visa, MasterCard if you want to have American Express. So those are 4 sort of logical meeting groups, but that's a valid suggestion, and we'll do that. Mr. Pachetti?
Okay, my suggestion would be that on Tuesday between 11 and 1, if possible, we have a steering committee with the industry committee, the finance with industry, and we discuss as to the logistics as to the makeup of the committee. And then we also discuss witnesses and how we're going to structure them together. And if we need to, we'll have it again. Another steering committee on the Thursday, because we have enough time to plan it, but I think we should get going on it sooner than later.
So on Tuesday the 28th? Or Tuesday the 5th?
Yeah, Tuesday the 28th.
Tuesday the 28th, the steering committee to discuss witnesses, groupings.
Well, first, logistics, whether we're going to go with a 24 or 12, and how. I think that has to. We have to see what industry thinks, and then at that point we'll discuss witnesses once we have the format. Because even for chairing the committee is going to be an issue as well. So it's nice to say you're going to co-chair, but then that means that the Conservatives have to be okay with the fact.
Well, everyone knows finance is the most important committee.
I thought that.
Okay, the proposal then is to have a subcommittee at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, looking at my other vice chairs and Mr. Mulcair, and Mr. Menzies isn't here, so he's agreeable. So, okay.
We talk to each other, so then we'll report back.
Okay, 11 a.m. Tuesday on the 28th, we'll have a joint steering committee. Good. Mr. Wallace?
Today's industry meeting is about future business, so I'll certainly bring what was said here today forward to that.
Screw it up.
I'll try not to.
Monsieur Laparé?
It's a guaranteed screw.
Ça va pour ça pour les cartes de crédit.
I agree with what was said about the credit cards, but you had talked about a trip to Washington. I would like to know whether you have dates now, or one date.
We'll concur, and I'll report to the committee at the subcommittee.
Et puisque nous parlons de travaux futurs,
Since we're talking about future business, we're now close to the middle of May. Even the 3rd week of May after the break, I think we are going to have 1, 2, or 3 meetings on the report on the study we've been having up to today. So I think it will have to be planned for.
In the subcommittee on Tuesday, but we have invited the 2 ministers, Minister Blackburn and Minister Flaherty. We'll obviously fit them in before May 31st, but we can, if the committee is agreeable, allocate then at least 2 meetings, maybe 3 meetings on discussion of access to credit. 2 meetings? Okay.
Right.
D'accord. Thank you. Thank you all. Meeting adjourned.